while, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I thought y'all were over having church. Doing better? Yeah. Sorry, I can do it.
All right, make everybody cry again.
Lord moves on me, I cry a lot, man. I can't hit it. Yeah, I'll try not to take too long. I know it's be warm out here, and then you got a baptizing that you want to take part of, and I'm excited to see that. I told Jody, I hope when we do ours, we'd like to see you all over with us. You know, fellowship means a lot, don't it?
It does.
We certainly appreciate it. I've had a real good time. I guess is everybody here that's going to be here? Mm-hmm. I want to talk to us a minute just about Fantasy Island, and it'll talk about immorality as far as men in struggles. And I'll tell you a little story as I get down in here, but let's look at the book of Judges. I know you have your Bible. Judges chapter 9 tells a story about right after the death of a man by the name of Gideon. Abimelech was a man who took upon himself the duty to become king. And of course it didn't work out, and there was a great civil war broke out between Abimelech and the people by the name of Shechem. In the process of that battle, Abimelech began to lose, and he ran to a great fortress. And this is what the Bible said. And Abimelech, when he came there in Judges chapter 9, verse 50, he said, "Then went Abimelech to Thebez, and encamped against Thebez, and took it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and thither fled all the men and women, and all they of the city, and shut it to them, and gat them up to the top of the tower. And Abimelech came unto the tower, and fought against it, and went hard unto the door of the tower to burn it with fire. And a certain woman cast a piece of millstone upon Abimelech's head, and all to break his skull. Then he called hastily unto the young man, his armor-bearer, and said unto him, Draw thy sword, and slay me." Now listen to this. "That men say not of me, a woman slew him. And his young men thrust him through, that he died." This great man that would begin to flee, when he ran too close to the wall, a woman pushed a millstone, and it fell on his head. And his only concern was what was going to be said concerning him after he died, that a woman slew him. And how many knows that that's the problem with a lot of men in our day today? You know, I've often said, as great of men are, some of the greatest men in history have been taken down simply because of a woman, through adulterous relationship or through promiscuity or whatever that goes on, sometimes can rob us of our victory and our anointing with God. And I'll say this, some greater men than me or you in biblical history has failed because of women. Adam was the first man, a perfect man, and he was led into sin because of who? His wife Eve. Samson was the world's strongest man when he was anointed of God, and yet if he didn't have women problems, he wouldn't have no story to even tell. Delilah was the one who talked him into shaving his hair and robbed him of his Nazarite vow. David, a man after God's very own heart. When you think about King David, oftentimes people don't consider all the good things that David did, but your eyes are always drawn to the one failure or to the one shortcoming that King David had in his life. And even though he did mess up, that was not the bend of his life. The bend of David's life was he loved God, and he wanted to serve God and be what God wanted him to be. But when you think about David's life, oftentimes we don't think about all the good that David accomplished. We think about the one black sin or the fault that was in David's life. Not only do you find the perfect man, Adam, a man after God's own heart, David, the strongest man, Samson, but you find the wisest man, Solomon, in the Word of God. As he drew to the end of his life, he multiplied wives and built temples unto their gods. And so even the wisest man was took in by the beauty and by the subtlety of a woman. And listen, friends, we all know, and we could talk about people sometimes that we know that have been taken in and has fallen to that kind of a sin. Several years ago, I went to a men's retreat, and I've often wanted to get him to come and speak at one of ours. he killed a world record buck. You see, and you can go online and you can look it up. It's called the German buck. He actually went in there to film himself killing a deer that he might win a free hunt with a professional hunter. Well, when he went in there, he was on 4 acres of property. He said he went in there early that morning, and a big old field full of does was there. Well, just about dark, there was one of the largest bucks he ever saw come out in the field, but it fell off too dark. Well, he said, you know, most of us deer hunters, you know, we dream about just that one deer coming in, and he thought, I'll stay there all night. Well, it got up, got real cold, so he snuck out of his deer stand, crawled out on his belly, and went home and tossed and turned all night thinking about that big deer, because he knew it was right there close. So he said about 3:30 he got up and crawled into his deer stand, and when he was going up the ladder, one briar hit his pants, and he heard that deer hit its feet and blow. When it went whoosh, how many knows that's the kiss of death right there? That deer's blowing you a kiss by, it's gone. Well, he knew he'd missed his chance. Just about daylight, he said, here come that big old buck right back in there. He said the buck knew that he was there, but he cast aside everything he learned to survive just to get with those field full of does up there. He run within 4 foot of his stand. He killed it, fell over in the field, just backed his truck up there, back up in there and got it. Trailed it around town, you know, like how most of us do. We won't brag on it, you know, just a little bit. We'll make sure everybody sees it. And one guy said that's a trophy buck, and they called buckmasters in. They scored it. It was the world's largest buck killed by either a crossbow or a compound bow. I mean, it just wasn't a big buck. It was a world-class record buck. And those deers don't live to be that big by being stupid. But one moment of time, that buck in full rut cast aside everything it learned just to survive, just to get with those does. And that's what men do. Sometimes we know better. Sometimes that we know what the Word of God says. Sometimes we know what the fate will bring. But if we're not careful, the strongest men in the world have cast aside everything they know just to have one moment of pleasure with somebody other than their spouse sometimes. Is that not right?
Yes,
and some of us can probably name people that's messed up and no doubt found forgiveness and grace and all that kind of stuff, but just one moment of time. And oftentimes I've always said, well, it's simply because of people living in Fantasy Island. You know, it always begins with an image. You know, I mean, years ago we used to watch on Friday nights. I can remember growing up, the TV went off at midnight. They played the Star Spangled Banner and it went snowing. There was no more channels after midnight. But on Friday or Saturday, we always would watch the Love Boat, Fantasy Island, Dallas, and Falcon Crest would come on. And I always wanted to see that little short guy yell, "De-plane, balls, de-plane." And when they talk about Fantasy Island, people would come to this place called Fantasy Island to live out their fantasies, only to realize that when they lived them out, they would come back and they'd want their reality back, because they realized that their fantasy was not really what they wanted. It was really, they wanted their old life back. And sometimes that's the way life is. Sometimes, and I can feel the Lord, I'm about to cry, but sometimes we live in a fantasy world. Sometimes it's all about imagination. That devil will build things up and he'll get you living in a fantasy world, whether it's real or whether it's false, and he'll lead you astray. And so many people has tried to live out their fantasies only to realize that their family and what they had is what they really wanted all along. Let me read in the book of Ezekiel chapter 8, and I'll share with you about how God even knows the very thoughts and the very intents of our heart. In Ezekiel chapter 8, Ezekiel at this time was a great prophet. And God told him in Ezekiel chapter 8, he was a very eccentric prophet. I mean, this guy, he would lay on one side for over a year. He'd eat his food in cow dung. He cut his hair off, let it blow away in the wind. I mean, he did a lot of things that God was articulating his message through certain performances that he did. Well, in Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 7, God tells him to do something very strange. He says, "And he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, behold, a hole in the wall. And then said he to me, Son of man, dig now in the wall. And when I had digged in the wall, behold a door. And he said unto me, Go in and behold the wicked abominations that they do there. So I went in and saw, and behold, every form of creeping things, and abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed upon the wall round about. And there stood before them 70 men of the ancients of the house of Israel, and in the midst of them stood Azana, I guess, the son of Shaphan, and every man his censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. Then said he unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen what the ancients do of the house of Israel, do in the dark of every man, and watch this, in the chambers of his imagery? For they saw the Lord seeth us not, but the Lord hath forsaken the earth. He said also to me, Turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see the greater abominations. But what God said is he said, Do you not see what the ancients and the people of God do in their imaginations when they say, the Lord saith not? He literally had him bore a hole through a wall. He found a door, opened the door, and he looked right into the imaginations of all the people of God. And the Lord said, This is what my people is thinking on, what their imagination's on. You see, sometimes it's one thing to keep ourselves in check, discipline, but God sees the intent and the motive of our heart and what goes through our minds. Even David would say, Lord, let the very meditation of my heart be pleasing in thy sight. The worst thing we can do is allow our imaginations to begin to wander. You know, we used to love riding cycles, and the one thing I'd catch myself doing is thinking a lot on that motorcycle. And if you're not careful, sometimes your mind will tend to wander in directions where it shouldn't go. How many's ever been there? Every one of us is probably could say. You know, because our mind, the Bible says that the carnal mind is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. And so there is a natural pull that the enemy tries to use to pull us away from the plan of God. And so many people live in what I call a fantasy island. Pornography and the sin of sexual sin is at an all-time high. How many would agree with that?
Amen.
Let me listen. I like stats because it puts things into perspective. Listen to what this says. According to a U.S. News World report, Americans spent no more than $10 million on pornography in 1973. $10 million. By 1999, however, they were spending $10 billion a year, a 1,000-fold increase. A U.S. News put it this way: it's an amount much larger than Hollywood's domestic box office receipts and larger than all the revenues generated by rock and country music recordings in 1 year was put into a billion-dollar industry, pornography. Statistics show us all kinds of stuff. Listen to this. 47% of families said porn is a problem in their home. 25% of all search engine requests that's on the website are related to searching for porn. 40 million people is the number of American adults who regularly visits pornography sites. 53% of men attending this 53% of all men attending a Promise Keepers, a Christian men event, 53% admitted that they struggled with pornography. The Justice Department said this: 90% of all children between the ages of 8 and 16 have been exposed to pornography online. Surveys show that the average age of first exposure to porn is 11 years old. Think about that. 11 years old. 47% of school-aged children receive pornographic spam every day in their internet or in their mailboxes. Representatives says that the pornography industry told Congress that 20 to 30% of all traffic to porn sites is from children. Now listen to this. A recent survey showed 37% of Christian women had viewed pornographic websites or had visited a romantic chat room. Now, and see, this ain't just a a gender neutral problem. It's on both sides. 1 out of every 3 visitors to a pornographic website is women. 37% of pastors say that pornography is a struggle for them. Think about that, guys. 37% of all pastors claim that they struggle with the sin of porn. 2/3 of divorce lawyers attending a 2002 meeting of the American Academy of Matrimony Law said excessive interest in an online porn contributed to more than half of all divorces that they handled that year. They said pornography had an almost non-existent role in divorce 7 years prior to that moment. Total adults sites are 4.2 million, and they comprise 12% of all the internet's material. Think about that. The number of pornographic web pages jumped, they said, from 14 million in 1998 to 260 million by the year 2003. It's an almost a 2,000% increase since that time. You see, and there's no wonder why men are struggling, you see. And I would dare say that there's probably some standing here that if we're not very careful, there's a natural pull to that if we're not careful. Men is men. You know, God made us visual. We're physical. Women are more emotional. When it comes to men, we're more physical, and we're more visual. And so that's why it's such a pull on men sometimes. And of course, when there's men that's not satisfied in their home or in their marriage, it's a natural thing sometimes for the devil to sneak right up on you and begin to put that right before you. Because if we're not careful, can I say, the strongest of us can fall. You know, we could name a worldwide preacher who was a great preacher. And no doubt he probably repented and found forgiveness. But when you think of this man's name, it's always associated with one dark oversight. Now there is forgiveness. I mean, Samson found forgiveness even when they shorn his hair. You know, the Bible said that his hair began to grow again. So there's renewal. There's forgiveness, and you can find, you can get your work back. But his eyes that they put out, they never healed them. So God renewed him, revived him, refreshed him, and even reused him at the end of his life. But the scar that sin left, God never healed that. And there's some times that although God can renew us and revive us and refresh us, there's some scars that sin can leave in our life that we'll never ever completely recover over. And this is one of them. That's why we must be able to guard our hearts and guard our life. Sometimes it's easy to have just having an accountability partner. Just like I said, this morning, girls are always taught to get in tune with their feelings. But men are people who are taught from little children not to be able to show their emotions because, my dad, you'd be out there hammering on that old roof or something, and you hear a ding ding thump, and people say wrong nail, and you're jumping up and down, and especially when you're real little, and you get big tears in your eyes, they say, oh, suck it up, be a man, come on, you ain't got to cry, that didn't hurt, and your finger hanging off, you got to go get 10 stitches, And so you're groomed from just a little boy not to show your emotions or feelings because you don't want to look like a wimp. Well, what happens is we grow up and we silently struggle with issues that we are ashamed to share with people. And so the only way we deal with it sometimes is thinking about it. We internalize it. We don't want to share our problems with nobody. And sometimes it gets to the point where it's a breaking point. Listen, friends, every one of us, and I know that there is some people you can't tell things to, but every person needs to have at least one person that they can go to and they can be real with. You need each other. This is why these meetings are so important. Listen, when Jesus was in this world, he dealt with different groups on different levels. He dealt with the multitude. And then he come along and And he had the 70, but we don't know nothing about their names, where they come from, only their number. That assisted him. Then Jesus had his 12 that he sold into. But then he had 3, Peter, James, and John, which was his inner circle. But then Jesus had one by the name of John. And that one, he began to share more things with. In fact, John was so close to him during the Last Supper that when he said, one of you shall betray me, John laid his head on his chest, and Peter was over on the other side, motioning to him, asking who it is that's going to betray him. And John looked up, laying right on Jesus' breast, and he told him, the one who gets me in the sock. During his crucifixion, while on the cross, Mary was there, and John was there. And he said, John, behold thy mother. Right. Mother, behold thy son. When he left the natural care of his mother, his earthly mother, in with John the Baptist. You know, we can relate to people in different ways, but every one of us, even as pastors and preachers, we need that one person that we can be real with. That one person that if we need to scream and holler and yell and cry, you know, that one person that we know that's not going to love us or see us any less than who we are. And I've told people in marriage counseling or whether they've got a substance abuse problem, I said, look, if you get to the point where you feel that you're going to have a drug or a drink or if you feel hurt, call me. You know, we'll jump in the truck and you can jump and scream and holler and beat on the dash and we'll do whatever you got to do just so you can heal and mend right. But all of us needs that one person. And how many of you, I mean, along with me, can say, I've silently struggled with issues by myself. Have you done that? Right. You just silently struggled. I mean, and there's nothing bad about that because the Lord knows it. Right. So just let me share some guidelines here, what we can do. Number one, I think it's good to set boundaries and have what I call an accountability partner. And I see a lot of great men going to Brother Joey's church, and you all can hold each other accountable. That guy that killed the largest buck in the world had a pornography problem, severe. He said that, you know, some guys can't go into liquor stores or walk by the booze, you know. He said he can't go down the magazine aisle without looking, seeing a half-naked woman there because he had a problem. I mean, a problem. He said he had to set his computer out in a public place. He linked his wife to all of his accounts so that no matter where he goes to, she knows where he's been. You see, so he keeps himself, he guards himself. He said when he goes to public meetings like this, if he's in a hotel room by himself, the first thing he does is throw a big sheet over the big one-eyed monster. Not that there's any sin in TV, but he's afraid to what he might do if he's left alone in that room with that TV. And the only thing with him is he acknowledges his problem. And he realizes his weakness. And he sets guardrails. He sets boundaries around his life. And sometimes that's what we need to do. I don't want to leave here and hear of nobody that a woman slew you. Now, you know, you can bounce back from it. But that'll be something that'll stick with you for the rest of your life. And I just got some things like this. You know, in relationships to each other. You know, Jesus said, you have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But Jesus said, but I say to you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Right. So it's not just a physical act, it's the intent and the motive of the heart. If in your heart you say, man, if I could do that and get away with it and not get caught, I'd do it. And I tell you, you're guilty.
That's right.
You're already guilty because you're emotionally been unfaithful to your wife. And I think that's why the Lord wants us to be modest in our dress, whether it's a woman or whether it's a man, because our eyes have a tendency to begin to wander. You know, what was it Paul said? He said, you know, judge not, but judge this rather, that you not put a stumbling block to fall before your brother. And sometimes women and men, if we dress in a way just to get a look from the opposite sex, to lead them to have a funny feeling about us, how many knows our motivation before we go out of the house is wrong. I said, before we leave, the intent of our heart is already wrong, and we can lay a stumbling block before our brothers and our sisters. And I know some people say, well, if they were Christians, they wouldn't be looking. I'd say, if you was a Christian, you wouldn't be exposing some things that you need to.
That's right.
I tell our young people, if you ain't got that for sale, don't be advertising.
That's right.
Amen.
That's right.
And so when we look at this, we got to be careful. So I just said, in relationships to others, I just said that we need to stay away from places that lend themselves to suggestive lust. I mean, you know, if we know we've got a problem, I mean, we just don't need to be around different places that offer that suggestion there. Number two, stay away from people who might be suggestive, enticing, no matter how enjoyable or pleasing they might be to be around. I don't meet with women by myself. When I first started pastoring early on, there was a lady on purpose all the time hung out by herself and waited. I was the last one to leave. She was the last one to leave. My wife never thought nothing about it. She'd jump in the car and she'd take the kids home. One day I told her, I said, you don't need to leave me alone there with that woman. I said, I got a funny feeling about her. And of course, my wife trusted me. But I said, you're my covering. I said, you need to cover me. So I told Stanley one time, and maybe some of you guys, I said, if you see me in the sanctuary and I'm leaving late and there's a woman there by herself, don't you leave the church. You keep me covered. You stay with me so there's no talk that could ever be started. And so if you know there's someone there grooming you, listen, girls, women are grooming you guys. And when I used to work in a factory 10 years, I'd watch maintenance men come down the line and they would purposely linger at one little, machine with this woman, and it wouldn't be 3 months that you'd find out they was having an affair, because they were spending more time with them than they was at home. They was working on them, and they were lingering around. And I've had women try to groom me, and they'll make little flirtatious moves, and they're waiting to see what your response is going to be, if you're open to it or not, and they'll groom you. They'll see what your response will be. Well, finally they figured out who I was, and they just stopped grooming me, because I just tell them, and so stay away from people that might be suggestive. What about refuse invitations to functions or socials that might lead to suggestive conversation or enticements? When it comes to ourselves, I think we need to, and I'm not a clothesline preacher, but how many knows that we need to dress to please the Lord? Amen. And we need to behave at all times like a Christian person, especially around women. And therefore build a testimony with people. And Job said this, guys. I think this is one of the most important things. Job says, "I made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid?" Job made a covenant not to look or think about immoral persons, immoral places, immoral things. Job said that many, many years ago. He said, "I'll make a covenant with my eyes." Number 3 says, "Keep the eyes and minds upon things that are true. Think on the things that are honest, just, pure, lovely, those things that have a good report." The Bible says to put your mind on those things. Learn to bring every thought into captivity, because we're human beings, guys. I mean, it's not the first look that'll get you. It's always that's that second look, right? And it's that third look. It's that lingering look. Even when David messed up with Bathsheba, the suggestion was it wasn't just a quick gaze. It was a long, lingering look. David looked, and then he inquired after her, because he took time to think about it. So when those thoughts come, take those thoughts into captivity. Bring them into subjection to the very law of God. Don't let it get from here down into here. Resist the first thought. Turn the mind, the body, immediately to other matters. Like I said, Jensen Franklin, I heard him on television just the other day preaching. He said he took a group of young men to the mission field. They hadn't seen their wives in about 2 weeks. And he said, getting on that plane, here come he said, a model. She was a knockout, a beautiful woman. And this old preacher noticed the eyes of them young men. And he said, right out loud in front of everybody, he said, "Good job, Jesus." And he said, all them boys got to looking around, you know, they got their attention. But see, their minds had already begun to wander. In the presence of others, I just said, guard yourself at all times. And this is what I said, and then I'm going to close because I don't want to take up too much time. It says, flee when suggestive statements are made. Excuse yourself. Show displeasure by statements or force if necessary. Joseph was a young man, probably a good-looking young man, when he went to Potiphar's house. And Potiphar was gone, and his wife made suggestions toward him over and over, pressed upon him every day to lay with her. This is what the Bible said, "Come and lie with me." And Joseph said, you know, basically, your master's been good to me. He's not withholding nothing from me except you. Why should I do this wicked thing before God? And of course, the Bible said she reached out to take hold of him, and he fled out of that place. And when he left, he lost his garment. He left his garment behind. He may not have, you know, he left his garment, but he didn't lose his testimony. He stayed faithful to God, and God rewarded him for that. And so, get out of there. Get away immediately. I just wrote down here, not allowing the pleasing words to stimulate and gratify your flesh. The flesh levels in expressions of pleasure and appreciation of the way somebody looks, dresses, works, serves, performs, and on and on. You've got to guard your heart and guard your life. Don't let it be said of you, a woman slew me. And I'm telling you, friends, I would say every man here at some point in time in their life has had the opportunity to be unfaithful somewhere in your life. And I tell people all the time, I say, women today don't care whether you're married or whether you're not married. Me and Alan went to Haiti, and you know, they can't speak English, so me and Alan, we couldn't speak Creole either, could we? So we speak real loud, slow English. And there was a woman who sat out there all the time. I'm going to tell on Alan here pretty soon. And she sat outside the restaurant. There's a little restaurant there, and there's a little bar there, but you had to go in through there to eat. Every morning we went for breakfast, and she was sitting there. The United Nations was the police force on that island. They were everywhere, and they had every one of those hotels rented. Well, that little Haitian girl was a prostitute, which we didn't have no idea until Raul told us. Well, she caught Alan coming through there, and Alan thought he's going to win her to Jesus. He's going to have her come to Jesus party there, you know. She sat down, Alan's talking to her, and she's trying to talk to him. He's trying to talk to her, and they couldn't communicate. I think Alan said, she said, "I'll be with you anytime." Is that what she said? Yeah. Said, I'll give you massage. And Alan realized right then this was not going to work out in his favor. so he ends up jumping out of that booth and getting out of there. And I teased him. I said, "You wait till I tell Rose." He said, No, don't tell Rose that. But I told Raul what happened. Oh, he laughed. He said, "She's a prostitute." I said, "Why don't she hit on none of the Haitians?" He said, "She sees Haitian." He said, "When she sees you, she sees money."
Money.
And Alan said, "Lord," said Chris, "if we was let her in our room, we'd wake up and won't have nothing left over." You know? But Alan knew right then. He said he knew that wasn't going to work out. So he jumped out there. But you'd see her sitting there. Yeah. And it's easy sometimes to give in. And they've been great men of God, men that I've respected and still respect today. That's been their major issue. And guys, listen, there's not one person here, especially these young men standing around here. You know, they'll have an issue in the flesh. And sometimes I just tell folks, don't go out on dates where there's going to be an opportunity for that to take place. Now that's my father-in-law right there. And I dated his daughter 2 years, and there was no fornication went on in those 2 years. And I will say, now, we were both Holy Ghost filled people, and if things got too much, we pulled back because we were conscious that God was there with us. Mm-hmm. And the anointing of heaven is more precious to me than one night of a fantasy. And there's times old devil come along And he'll try to put that in my mind, and I'll look back and I'll say, I ain't losing my family or my anointing for nothing. And all of us, I don't know why I feel like saying this, guard your hearts.
Amen.
Guard your mind. Don't be alone with a woman that you know that's even suggestive. Billy Graham has all his life. There's never been a spot on his life.
That's right.
And they said that when he goes to preach somewhere, he always makes somebody go in his room first and search the closets, everything. Search his room before he ever goes in because of that one thing. Just because we're strong physically don't mean we're always strong spiritually. Samson was a mighty man of God. He could carry the gates of the city off. He could take the jawbone of an ass and slay 3,000 Philistines single-handedly. He was a man's man, guys. And though he was strong physically, he was weak spiritually. He was weak in his integrity. He had a problem with women. And there's a lot of great, strong men whose major problem is women. And I wonder how many of us today, and you don't raise your hand, would say that they've been websites or they've been suggestive material show up on a web page that you have been interested and you clicked on. And you saw things that you know deep down in your heart it really wasn't pleasing to the Lord. What happens is one thing leads to another, to another, to another, to another. And I would say, build boundaries around your life. Be careful. Amen. Because even women in church, guys, though it's not just a problem in the world, it's a problem becoming right in church. And I'm going to say this, and I don't want nobody looking around. It's all about our heads. Just for a moment. How many say, Brother Chris? And I'm going to go back and say, how many of us would say at one time that was my problem?
Yes.
Come on, anybody?
Amen.
Just raise your hand. I mean, guys, we're men here.
Amen.
How many say since you've been saved that the enemy has come and pressed your mind hard on that? Let me see some hands. It really worked with you on it. Now let me get real close to this. Not to say you've physically done anything. How many say that there have been times you failed in that?
Yes.
Maybe that's why the Lord wants us to speak about this today. Because He knows our hearts. He sees the imaginations of our hearts. You know, it's one thing to put a good foot forward in front of everybody else, but God knows you.
Amen.
God knows you. And isn't it wonderful that even in what you just confessed, by the raising of hands, He still loves us.
Amen.
And He still gives us this day to repent from it and turn from it and say, Lord, from right here on, I'm going to guard my heart.
Yes.
I'll make a covenant with my eyes. And I'm going to stop. And one man said, and I totally agree 110%. If you see a pretty girl, I look at my wife and I say this, there's no other woman more beautiful than my wife, because that woman did not pay the price to bear my children. That's my wife. And I aim to stick and be faithful to my wife.
Amen.
Now he's want to pick us something, and I don't know if there's any place to kneel. Maybe, how many say, Brother Chris, I might want to just pray for a minute. How many's been convicted today or challenged today? When he plays, let's just bow your head and just pray a few minutes. Ask the Lord to move on. You can go anywhere you want to. Just get by yourself, do whatever you got to do. And just say, Lord, forgive me, help me. You see me, you know all about me. And just help me not to fall prey to this. You know, and there's no shame in it, guys. It's just the fact that we're in the flesh. Even Paul wrestled with the flesh, Romans 7.
Absolutely.
He said, for to will is present with me. But how to find out how to do that which is good, I find not. He said, I've got the desire to do right. But sometimes Paul says, I don't find the strength or the power even to know how to do it. But when you get to Romans chapter 8, he tells us how to do it. Yielding to the Spirit of God. It's the only way we can. So as he sings, you can find yourself a place to pray. And I hope I said something to help you today.
Thank you, Lord.
Bow your heads and talk to the Lord. Billy.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved
Help us.
a wretch like me.
Protect us, God, from that sin, that
I
temptation.
once
No, Lord, no,
was
never
lost,
see us fall.
but now I'm
Keep
found.
us holy, Lord.
I was blind,
Keep us to be
but
holy.
now I see.
Oh, Lord, in your presence is too precious.
Grace
God, we need you. We need
that
you.
calls my
Bless
heart
these men, God.
to fear
Lord,
and grace. My fears
oh,
believe.
Jesus, help us. Strengthen us.
How precious is that grace appeared. Oh, the hour I first believed, for it was amazing grace.
Bless them, Lord.
How
Help us.
sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see.
Maybe somebody want to testify here before we